5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, got some really important stuff to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about who might potentially be manning critical agencies that will affect all of our lives because they have very important roles in governing the country when it comes to things like law enforcement and our fundamental health.
How shocked were you when you heard that Gaetz was going to be the Attorney General and RFK Jr. was going to be HHS Secretary?
You know, I was shocked when Donald Trump won the election. You remember we were both pretty flabbergasted. Well, that was nothing compared to the shock. You could have knocked me over with a pinky when I heard about Gaetz and RFK Jr. But I've got a lot to say about that. Of course, I have my own theories about it all. How many viewers do we have?
I don't know. It hasn't popped
Don't
up
worry
yet
about
on
it.
my screen. I wasn't that shocked.
29.
I wasn't that shocked about RFK Jr. because he had been saying that he was going to be in a major health role. So
I didn't. I thought he might have some position, but to be head of eight health and human services, to be the chief person responsible for the health of Americans, I didn't quite expect that. And Trump's transition director just a couple of days ago said, "No chance that's going to happen." Shows how much they can believe. You can believe what they say, but that's a whole other story. I don't want to get into that tonight.
all right. So what is your take? What are your theories on these appointments on this cabinet that Trump is assembling?
I'll start with Matt Gaetz. And let me say, I met Matt Gaetz at the set of MSNBC a number of years ago. I talked to him for about half an hour, and I really liked him. This is not personal.
What?
We got along really well. He
What?
was, yes, believe it or not, he was very cordial, knew who I was, said he greatly respected my work. We had a very nice talk. So this is not personal. I like the guy personally, but has nothing to do with my views of him as Attorney General. I
Well,
will
he
say
also he also. I mean, there's a report on him that could uh, uncover
I
some
understand
really
all of that.
terrible things
I
about him
get that.
too. Okay.
And I'm going to talk about that. Don't worry. I'm just saying my personal interaction with him. We didn't discuss whether he was sleeping with, minors or trafficking women or, taking drugs. It was just a casual, very friendly, very cordial conversation. And the reason I say that is I'm about to get into some of the gory details. I just wanted to make clear it's not personal. Same thing. How many times have you heard me scathingly critique Merrick Garland, about as harshly as I've ever critiqued anyone? And he's my buddy. I've known him for over 60 years. My views have nothing to do with my personal interactions with any of these folks. Now, Matt Gaetz, if you had scoured the country from north to south, east to west, Hawaii to Alaska, you could not have found a worse pick for Attorney General than Matt Gaetz. Of course, you want to pick for Attorney General someone whose only contact with the Department of Justice is that you were under investigation for 2 years for, violating laws about sleeping with minors, possible sex trafficking. Now, they did close the investigation. That doesn't mean he didn't do it. It just means the witnesses were a little unreliable. They didn't believe that they had a case that they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's
But
not
but was isn't
proving the
there
witness.
wasn't there like a house ethics report that was like
I'm
just
getting to that.
oh,
I told you I would get to that. Hey, young fella,
sorry.
I'm the one who's got hearing problems, not you.
Sorry.
I'm getting to that. So that's his only contact with justice. And his buddy, who was on these trips with him, I think is serving a lengthy prison term. Now, here's the next critical thing. Of course, you want to appoint someone who is under investigation by a Republican House, by a bipartisan committee for, again, sex trafficking, a host of other illicit and illegal activities. So here's the sequence, and I don't believe in coincidences, Sam.
Right.
Wednesday, Trump says he's going to be my attorney general. It's not a formal appointment, just something Trump says, right? He's not president yet. He has no power to appoint anyone to anything. And then that same day, Matt Gaetz uses this as a reason to resign from the House. And what was about to come down 2 days later, uh, tomorrow, Friday, this scathing report from this bipartisan House Ethics Committee, which, according to reporting by the New York Times, would be devastating for Matt Gaetz. So, do you think for a moment the timing was accidental, that this gave him a safe passage to get out of Congress and avoid having that scathing report dumped on him? Now, I presume the report may well leak, but that's not going to have the same gravitas as the report actually being issued by the committee itself. Now, here's why I think this is all a feint. I think this gave Gaetz excuse to dodge accountability for what he's done and what the House Ethics Committee found. And I don't think ultimately Donald Trump is going to appoint him as Attorney General. I think it's a feint. I think he'll withdraw the appointment and appoint someone else who is no less loyal to Trump, no less sycophantic, and no less willing to do whatever political errand, whatever political attacks Trump wants. And then, we'll say, oh, he's not Matt Gaetz, he's not so bad, and he'll sail through whoever it is. I'm sure it'll be another loyalist, and he will sail through Senate confirmation. So that's my take. I think it's a fake. I think it's a feint. I
That's a pretty
think there's
good
going to be
take.
a switcheroo here.
Just to clarify, earlier that was me doing a feint. That was like me
Oh,
juking. Yeah.
didn't you go to like boxing club
Yes.
and they taught you how to feint and fake, huh?
Well, I was doing like a basketball one. But yeah,
Oh, I remember the
a
last time I
boxing one would be
smoked you
like
in
this.
basketball. Yeah, I remember that.
Do you think that if your feint theory isn't correct and he actually goes to the Senate for appointment, do you think he'll actually get through?
I think if anyone doesn't get through, it'll be him. But Republicans do not have a history of standing up to Trump.
True.
And the spineless Democrats can't do anything because they're going to be in the minority. Uh, Look what happened with the bipartisan border bill. Virtually everything Republicans wanted. You have to have bipartisan agreement or you won't get anything done. It was brokered by a conservative Republican senator, Senator Langford of Oklahoma, an impeccable conservative. And just Trump was a private citizen then, not even president of the United States. And just on Trump's word, the Senate killed it. So I have very little hope that the Senate will stand up to Trump on anything. I've heard all these folks, oh, the Senate will never do this, the Senate will never do that. You know, I don't believe it for a moment. I think the Senate will cave to whatever Trump wants. There's another way Trump can get him in, and that is to have the Senate recess, which the Republicans could do, and then put in every appointment he wants as a recess appointment that bypasses Senate approval. And recess appointees can serve for up to 2 years. So there are several ways in which Trump can have his way. And I have little faith that Republicans are going to stand up to him.
Right. Um,
So I still think it's a feint, but we'll see.
Gotcha. All right. What's your RFK Jr. take, Dad? Maybe not as
Well,
spicy as your that faint take is a spicy take, Dad.
yeah, no one else has talked about that. You've heard it here first on
First.
Lichtman Live, like you hear a lot of things first. Now, RFK Jr., Trump has said, I want to make America great again. I want to take us back to some time when America was great. A lot of people were saying, well, that means going back to the 1950s when blacks were under Jim Crow discrimination, women didn't have basic rights, there was no abortion rights. But with the appointment of RFK Jr., he wants to take us back to the 1850s. This guy is a quack. He mongers pseudoscience that has been refuted by numerous scientific studies supported by none, except by fellow quacks. He's anti-vaccine, so he wants to take us back to the era when children weren't protected against measles, rubella, mumps. Let's throw polio in for good measure. Why not stop smallpox vaccinations? It is utterly absurd. It is his anti-vax stance, which is just based on nonsense conspiracy theories and no science, will put millions of children, if he's able to implement it, at risk in this country. We've seen outbreaks of measles even when a few parents decide they don't want to get their kids vaccinated and they become sources of infection. Imagine the havoc that would be wreaked on our children by some kind of widespread prohibition on the basic vaccines that have kept our kids safe. I would say, as much as anything else, the vast increase in life expectancy from, about 40 in the 19th century to well into the 70s today is due as much to immunization as it is to anything else. That's why I'm saying he doesn't want to take us back to the 1950s RFK Jr. He wants to take us back to the 1850s. And more broadly, you're putting a guy who is a quack, who mongers conspiracy theories, who has no basic grasp of even the most elementary science, in charge of one of the largest, most important federal agencies that has tremendous impact upon the health of our kids and every American. Now, there are those who say, oh, maybe it'd be a good thing. He'll go after big pharma. Maybe he'll break up big pharma. Right. You telling me Trump's Justice Department is going to break up big corporations, that give him all these donations? If you believe that, I've got a big bridge in my hometown of Brooklyn that I can sell you. I see the RFK Jr. appointment as a disaster to the public health of this country. I see it as a rollback of basic science. And I see it as part of something I talked about at great length and depth last time, as part of this massive disinformation campaign that is being waged on America that, wants to turn us into 1984, where famine is plenty, war is peace, hate is love, where facts are simply turned upside down, where science is disregarded, where quack theories rage. And this is really frightening, really scary. It's not surprising that, virtually the entire Kennedy family came out against RFK Jr., not in a small way, but saying he is a great danger to the country. Can you imagine the whole family of a candidate coming out and calling him a danger? That certainly has got to tell you something. And these are not the only dubious appointments. Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence? You've got to be kidding me. She has no experience for the job. She is known to cozy up to dictators, including Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Our allies are not going to want to share intelligence with someone like that, who's not qualified and, has sympathy for our dictatorial adversaries. And without sharing with our allies, our whole intelligence community is going to be severely undermined. And then there's this Pete Hegseth at Defense, and that's really chilling because apparently he has an agenda to fire the independent generals. Remember what Trump said? I want generals like Hitler's generals, who will do whatever I want them to do, regardless of the Constitution and the law. And to invoke Hitler's generals is so incredibly offensive to me as a Jewish person who's lost a family in the Holocaust. Should be totally offensive to anyone. What did the Hitler generals do? We think uh, Hitler's victims all died in the death camps like Auschwitz. A lot of them did, but hundreds by mobile machine gun firing death squads headed by Hitler's generals, whose job was to kill as many Jews as possible. One of these generals, General Ohlendorf, testified at the Nuremberg war crimes trial. And he was asked, why'd you machine gun Jewish women and children? Because he said, that was our main target. We were ordered to wipe Jews off the face of the earth. And it was really important to follow these orders and particularly to kill women and children. These are the kind of generals that Donald Trump wants, that followed these kinds of orders blindly, had no respect for human rights, for humanity. It's absolutely chilling. And, how many times have I said, you've got to take Trump seriously. You can't dismiss what he says. Oh, he's just joking. He doesn't mean it. It's just political. It's just hyperbole. How many times have we heard cowardly apologists say that? And, as a student of history, I've warned, when you don't take would-be authoritarians seriously, that is exactly when they tighten their grip upon a people. Trump is now proving he's doing exactly what he told you he would do, and which so many of apologists have said will never happen, will be dismissed. Virtually every one of his appointees, except maybe Marco Rubio at State, every other one is right in your face. My loyalists, they're going to carry out my revenge agenda. They're not going to care about the Constitution. They're not going to care about law and order.
Wow, Dad, that was quite the speech you had there.
Well, I warned about this. If I hadn't warned about it, I wouldn't have the kind of credibility I think I hopefully do have to say these things. And I've studied the history. I know how authoritarianism takes place. I just did an interview with a journalist in Turkey, and he explained how, the grip of authoritarianism came down on Turkey, largely through vast misinformation, that they even reinstalled the authoritarian government there with 60% inflation. So this idea, oh, that voters just vote on inflation, that's all that matters. What a pile of nonsense. The disinformation that affects every aspect of an election is of new and critical importance.
Alrighty. You ready to get
You ready for questions?
I was about to say the exact same thing. You ready to get some questions?
I thought maybe you had something to add.
No, I think you handled that. I got nothing to add.
Wow, that's high praise coming from someone young and sharp.
Again, young, I'll take. Sharp,
Yeah, I think so. How many viewers?
3,381.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Some quick housekeeping. If you want to follow us, Dad, I put these cool little social media tags. You can't see them, but everybody else can see them. If you want to follow us, follow us. Remember, donations and member questions get priority. We can't get to every question, but we try the best we can. If you want to join our Discord or our Reddit, the link to those are in the description of this video. All right. You ready, Dad?
Yeah, don't forget we need members.
I just said that. I literally just said
so
that.
You are young and sharp. I'm old and hard of hearing. What can I tell you?
Hero75 says, saw on the news that Trump could force Congress into recess to make appointments, sideline them. Does Trump or Congress control the length of a forced recess, and how long could a forced recess go for?
Trump does not control resource. Congress does, and Congress is controlled by Republicans who have shown, that they're willing to do Trump's bidding. I understand that his first choice for Senate leader, Senator Scott, did not win. We got Senator Thune, but he said he's 100% behind Trump. So Trump can't force a recess, but he could certainly influence the Republican leadership to create a recess, then in one day he can install all his appointees without any Senate hearings, any Senate vote, and they can serve for 2 years. And I think that is not an unlikely scenario since he doesn't care about any democratic procedures, even though the Constitution says, these appointees should be serving only with the advice and consent of the Senate. I am sure he is perfectly willing to use the loophole of recess appointments to get everyone in no matter what.
Speaking of that, Private CM says, how likely is RFK Jr. and Gaetz to be confirmed? Give us a percentage for each, Dad. Come on. Why not?
Well, I don't think Gaetz will come before the Senate,
Right.
but I think RFK Jr. is about a 50-50, maybe a 60-40 to get confirmed, because I don't believe Republicans are going to stand up to Trump.
I
And
don't
there are
think.
a lot of conspiracy theorists who agree with RFK Jr. among Republicans.
I think RFK is a shoo-in. RFK Jr. I don't think they're going to
Well,
block
I'd
him.
give it 60-40, but you might be right.
Yeah. Brendan Pollock says, as a healthcare employee, I'm devastated by the appointment of that fool RFK Jr. Having worked in the field, however, his stances are not entirely unpopular. What do you think about that, Dad?
Yeah, that's right. Uh, conspiracy theories resonate. They persuade people. They're easy to grasp. Conspiracy theories have held their grip on people throughout history. In the early 20th century, Henry Ford, America's leading industrialist, uh, disseminated this absurd uh, conspiracy theory about the Jews, that this group called the Elders of Zion, this was based on a forgery from the Russian Tsarist government called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that this group of Jews were controlling the world, were manipulating world governments, were fomenting communism and socialism to control the world. Not a scrap of truth to it, but it gained widespread adherence around the world, in the United States, and by the way, in parts of the world to this day, the protocols of the Elders of Zion are still have sway.
Member Vernus Carby says, I wonder if Trump filled his cabinet with clowns because no decent person would work for him. And I know in 2016 there was a lot of discussion around who was going to work for him, would decent people work for him. It seems like less and less decent people are willing to work for him. And it seems like his only criteria for cabinet appointments is blind loyalty.
I agree with the latter, but not the former.
Oh,
Absolutely, his only criteria is someone who'll do whatever he wants them to do blindly, no matter what. That seems to be his sole criteria, which, who was the guy who way back when in 2017 said only the best people? Now the criteria seems to be only the spineless people who'll do anything I want them to do. But I really disagree. It's very hard to turn down a plum position in a presidential cabinet. Look at Marco Rubio. I don't agree with him a lot of things, but he's not, RFK Jr. or a Matt Gaetz. He's at least a respectable
eh,
appointee.
eh,
Come
is
on,
he?
what? How much better are you going to get than that among Republicans?
Well,
He's
that's
not
the
the
issue. Most Republicans are blindly loyal to him.
Yeah, but well, right, but at least Rubio is somewhat competent, unlike some of these others. It has
Okay.
qualifications. But my point is, it's not that people won't work for him. It's that he is doing exactly what he wants to do, and he is thumbing his nose at everybody else. He's saying, I'm going to do over the next 4 years anything I want to do. It doesn't matter whether it's lawful or constitutional or upholds our democracy, and I dare you to do anything about it.
John Stone says, love your show, gents. I am curious what new keys have you heard proposed by others? For example, media control. Are there any you might consider?
I've heard, any number of new keys: disinformation, media, inflation, gender, race. And, it's only been a week since the election. We have 4 years until I have to make my next prediction. So I'm not going to make any snap judgments at this point about the keys. I'm going to take my time and see what happens over the next months and years. But, friendly suggestions as opposed to the hate that we're still getting, although it's diminished a lot. I think it's going to go away very soon. Uh, Respectful suggestions are always welcome. We're always open to that, but it's way too soon to make any changes.
Do you think you misinterpreted Trump's charisma?
Absolutely not. I don't think this has anything to do with Trump's charisma. I'll get to the key in a moment. It's not that there was this big boom for Trump, Sam, right? That's
Right.
not the story of this election. He
True.
did about as well as he did in 2020. What's the real story of this election?
The 10 million blue votes that didn't show up.
Yeah, even if half of them had showed up, Harris would have won. That had nothing to do with Trump's charisma. These people do not like Trump. But like all of us, they were victims of misinformation on a wide scale. And, I might not like Trump, but we need to change. This administration has been so bad. The economy's so terrible. We have all these illegal immigrants, et cetera, et cetera, all the misinformation. So that's the story of this election. And Trump, I didn't give it to him in 2016. I didn't give it to him in 2020 because the key clearly states you cannot just appeal to a narrow base. In 4 years as president, his approval rating was 41%, right at the bottom of all presidents historically. Even if you count in this election and three elections, he still lost the vote of the people by about 7 to 8 million total votes. Even today, he is deeply negative in his approval rating. He's at -8 to 9 points. That's astounding for a president-elect. Harris, who lost, does much better in her approval rating. So this has nothing to do with some Trump boom or, grand approval of Donald Trump. Quite the contrary. In fact, this is, I think, looking at the last 18 elections, I didn't do this analysis, Harry Enton did. This is only the second time that the winning candidate had a lower net approval rating than the losing candidate. Second time out
Interesting.
of 18 elections.
Can I push back on you a little bit? Do you mind?
Sure.
Or do you not want pushback tonight?
No, I'm, as I said, someone young and sharp can always push back on me. If you don't think you're sharp, you better not.
All right. Well, so this is what I was thinking when you were talking. So, right, I don't know what it's at right now, but right, Harris lost anywhere from probably in the end, anywhere from like 7 to 10 million votes, right?
Oh, no, 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 no. I think it's more like just over 1%. So, you know, 2 million, 1.5 million votes, a very small number.
No, from Biden, I'm saying.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yes.
I
I'm
mean, like
saying,
7 or 8 million votes from Biden, 10
right,
million votes. Yeah.
right. So, and I guess we don't 100% know if those 7 million people didn't show up or they switched to Trump and Trump got more votes from people who didn't vote last time. We don't know the answer to that. But let's just say
We'll
those,
know it, and I'm quite positive it is not Biden voters who switched to Trump. It's
mm,
Biden voters who didn't vote.
all
Over,
right,
I mean, some did, but overwhelmingly, it's going to be non-voters. Otherwise, Trump's numbers would be much bigger.
right. All right. So let's take that. Let's just for this moment take that as a fact that, 7 to 10 million blue voters who voted for Biden didn't show up in 2024. Wouldn't that undermine your misinformation claim? Because the misinformation would mostly be affecting moderate or red voters, where further left voters or even blue voters who didn't show up, in your theory, wouldn't be as affected by the misinformation campaign.
Not as much, but everyone was affected by the misinformation campaign. It was so pervasive. And meanwhile, the mainstream media is rapidly disappearing. You know, the counter, our great newspapers and uh, television outlets are being taken over by the billionaires. Look at the Washington Post and the LA Times. Other outlets are struggling. They're shutting down operations. They're firing people. And meanwhile, you've got, these billionaires. You got Musk, who has more wealth than most countries, roaring along with their misinformation. Plus, a lot of those Biden voters, we don't know this, but I would speculate a lot of them are not far left voters, but are more moderate voters who are definitely affected by the misinformation.
Gotcha. Alrighty. Our next question is from, I don't know, they don't have a name associated. They say, do you think it's possible that Republicans choose a more moderate candidate like Nikki Haley in the 28 election, as a Trump ally could become a liability after Trump, quote, ruins the country?
Well, if Trump ruins the country, which I think is quite possible, although who knows? Yes. But if Trump doesn't ruin the country, we're going to get J.D. Vance.
Yeah. Derek Taylor says, Professor Lichtman, you should have a consortium of people, either on this podcast or someone you trust, to give unbiased interpretation of your keys call when you make your final assessment. What do you think?
We've talked about that before, and we've heard people volunteering. I'm wide open to that. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
Someone donated $2 and said, I love Trump's appointments, MAGA 2024 to 2028. Thank you for the $2.
Yeah.
Do you know what the
That's about what those all those appointments are worth.
I got him. Oh, you thought you were coming on here trolling us.
Yeah,
And
maybe I'm a little sharper than, you might think.
wow, amazing. Do you know what the Onion is or Infowars
I
is,
sure
Dad?
do.
What are your thoughts on the Onion buying Infowars?
I love it. The Onion is a wonderful satirical magazine, and they're very much, against the gun culture and the plague of gun violence. One of my favorite lines from The Onion, in fact, relates to that and very much ties into Alex Jones and Infowars. The headline was, there's nothing we can do about mass shootings, says the leaders of the only country where it regularly occurs.
Um, Member Sty Molly One says, do you think people should start to boycott X given Elon Musk using it as a disinformation platform?
Why not? I think, you know, there's not much we can do to combat what's going on because, the billionaires have so much power. But, I canceled my Washington Post subscription because I was so appalled by the billionaire Jeff Bezos and the Murdoch people he installed. So, voting with your dollars is perfectly reasonable.
I do wonder though that I guess the counter would be if all these, fact-based people start leaving X, it'll just be full of the misinformation and disinformation will probably go up and will take over the platform.
Yeah, that's always the problem,
Yeah.
Do you want to stay and fight?
Right.
And while you're doing that, support them or just withdraw, which is better,
Right.
which is worse. It's,
Yeah.
the age-old issue.
You still have a Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm thinking of withdrawing though. It's just too many trolls.
Yeah, there are a lot of trolls. Um, Beam Right asks, what are our options for protecting democracy?
Well, vote. The big problem last time was people didn't vote. Well, we have an election coming up in a couple of years. Hopefully, it'll still be a free and fair election, although that's not guaranteed. Get out and vote and organize politically. Prepare for the next elections by organizing, getting groups to get out the vote, to promote candidates committed to democracy. The election is not that far away. It'll be on us before you even know it. And there's no time to waste.
A lot of people in the chat are saying blue sky is better. A lot of
I've
people.
heard that. Yeah,
I don't know what
that's an
that is.
alternative to X. I
Oh,
don't know anything about it. I'm sure you know a lot more, but it's supposedly a more liberal alternative to X.
I don't
But
know anything.
beyond that, I don't know anything about it.
I don't know anything about it. But the thing, okay, it's a more liberal alternative to X. But if both sides of the political spectrum are just in
I
their
know
own political or in their own social media spaces, that doesn't really solve anything either.
that doesn't solve a darn thing. That's
Yeah.
right. We need, a more neutral media
Right.
space.
Right.
But it's very hard because, who controls this stuff? The billionaires. And, this is a guy, Elon Musk, who says we should fire strikers. And you think he's out for the working class, not for himself?
I don't think he's out for the working. I don't know if you're talking to me, sir, but I don't think he's out
I'm
for the
not
working
talking to
class.
you
Oh,
in particular.
gotcha. Nadis says Tulsi Gabbard is listed on the National Security Watch List as a possible agent of Russia. I don't know if that's true, but that's what this user
I
says.
don't know if that's true either, but it
Um,
wouldn't surprise me.
and I guess is she up for a cabinet? I know she's been
A
floated around.
critical one, Director of National Intelligence.
Oh,
I don't know if she's on a watch list or not, but I do know she is very much sympathetic to Putin, as is Trump, of course. So there's no dissonance there, and very sympathetic to the murderous dictator of Syria. And, I've seen reports from former intelligence agencies that she's like the worst possible choice for Director of National Intelligence, that she's going to give comfort to our enemies and put off our allies who are not going to want to share intelligence with the United States.
well, this user wants to know, or this listener wants to know, is there anything Biden can do to stop security breaches like Tulsi Gabbard gaining a major cabinet position?
It'd be very, very difficult for him to do anything about it because once she comes in, Biden's gone. It's a new administration. So, whatever he can do to create safeguards with our allies and, create the sharing of information as much as possible in a proactive way before she comes in, that would be the most useful.
Tyler Tarbett with a $50 donation. Thank you so much. They say, how surprised are you that the Harris campaign blew $1 billion? I was shocked to hear that. She should have never lost with that war chest.
There is no correlation whatsoever between fundraising and spending and the outcome of elections. Hillary Clinton raised way more money than Donald Trump and had more ads and still lost. The impact of these ads is extremely uncertain because people discount everything that comes just from a political party. Hey, back in the 30s, when Franklin Roosevelt won 60% plus of the vote, he was outspent by the Republicans.
Good point, Dad. Our
And the,
next,
the whole campaign was $11 billion. So there was a hell of a lot more being spent than just what Harris spent. And would you believe in the FDR days, presidential campaigns were like $5 to $10 million?
speaking of that, Miles Wolf says, how do you compare the power party bosses had during the Truman campaign / term to the power billionaires have in today's politics?
Yeah, no question the billionaires have taken over from the party bosses. Uh, Party bosses in the days really before the McGovern Commission mandated that delegates be selected in open primaries and caucuses, like Mayor Daley in Chicago, had a lot of influence. Now, the billionaires have taken over, and I think they have even more influence because the influence of the party bosses is limited within the party organizations. The influence of the billionaires is unlimited and expanding. As I said, we're getting close to realizing these science fiction books that I read as a kid, where a few people are so rich that they're able to control everything that goes on in society. We're getting there. We're not there. And we can still stop from getting there. But I am sounding a 5 alarm warning.
Five
No
alarm.
one can be richer than most of the countries of the world.
5 alarm.
5 alarm.
Will Strutchermeyer says, leaving your bias aside, Should you have given Biden a military success in Ukraine? Your book clearly states the need for broad recognition by the American people. The American people's support for Ukraine has dropped significantly from February 2022. It's worth noting you had the key leaning false for the last year and turned it true at the last minute.
Right. After
Yeah,
the big surge into Russia,
yeah,
there was a huge surge of support at the time I turned the key for Ukraine. I'm not sure, where it went after that, but there was very strong support for Ukraine in the last poll that was taken in August.
right,
And I don't think the American people broadly wanted to see Putin conquer Ukraine.
right. Suzanne Cobble says, "Can you weigh in on Greg Poltz's work and its possible effect on the election outcome?" Do you know who that is?
Greg, Greg Palast, is that who they're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, he is an investigative reporter. I can't vouch for his work, but he claims that there was, in fact, widespread irregularities in this election. I don't necessarily, I can't prove that. I have no information one way or another. But aside from him, I just read a letter by something like 8 or 10 of the nation's leading cybersecurity experts. These are impartial, PhD professors, think tank folks, in which they say there is strong indication that there were real irregularities, maybe fraud in this election. We're not claiming that it determined the outcome, but in this lengthy letter, they said this is to Harris and obviously to Biden, who still controls the FBI and the cybersecurity operations, that we need to have a thorough investigation into this election. That's way beyond Palace. That is some of the nation's leading experts in cybersecurity. I take it very seriously, although I have no opinion one way or another how an investigation may come out.
I didn't hear about this letter.
Just came out today. Let
What
me
did
see if I can find it.
I would say, what did they say exactly? Did they
It's a
provide?
lengthy letter, and I didn't understand it all, to tell you the truth. But the basic message, get my phone here. The basic message was that there's a lot of suspicious things in this election. We're not saying it determined the outcome, but we are saying that it really merits serious investigation.
But
This was
what are the suspicious things they
I
cited?
can't I can't go through it. It was very technical.
Okay. I want to be
And I
very
just saw it. I just briefly skimmed it.
all right.
Just came out, I think.
I just want to be very careful because
Oh yeah, I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying these are serious people.
okay, I would have to read it. Maybe I'll read it at some
Yeah.
point.
If you want to take a 2 minute break, I'll see if I can find my phone and find the letter.
Uh, nah, it's up to you. I don't know.
All right, give me a 1 minute break. I'm not sure if I put my phone.
All right, I want to give some shout outs to some people in the chat. We don't do shout outs very often on Lichtman Live. On my post show we do. Sharon Novak, shout out. Carlos Martinez, shout out. Peter Zukowitz, Zukowitsky, shout out. Lucky Mr. B, shout out.
All right, I'm back.
Oh,
That wasn't
okay.
even a minute, was it?
No, I'm just giving some shout outs.
Good. How many viewers?
4,000.
Nice. Oh,
Oh, what?
Mom has my phone. Thank you. You want to come on?
No, God, no.
You missed a treat.
What?
Mom coming on.
Ah, damn.
All right. I'll look for this, and you can keep asking questions.
All right. Our next question is from Jonathan Beach. They say, Dr. Lichtman, what are your best and worst case scenarios for the Trump presidency?
The worst case scenario is that he puts in all of these uh, loyalists, unqualified, into positions. Uh, they roll back health protections, vaccines. They cozy up to the world's worst dictators. They carry out Trump's revenge against, political leaders he doesn't like Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi or whoever else is on his enemies list, and that they take steps to undermine a fair and free election. The best scenario would be that somehow Republicans stand up to him, that they don't tolerate the worst of the nominees, and he's got to nominate more qualified people who have more respect for law and order and the Constitution, and that, in fact, we continue to have free and fair elections.
Good answer, Pops.
Thanks.
Do you want another question or do you want to keep looking
No, no,
up?
keep asking
Okay.
questions.
Girl Power says, given Trump's blatant threat to American democracy and the Constitution, is there any peaceful way he can still be prevented from becoming president in January?
The only way would be if, in fact, there is absolute proof positive that he was elected by election fraud. I don't think that's the case. I have no reason to believe that. I'm not an expert on technology, but if you ask me what the only way, and that would be the only way.
Scott. No. Thank you, Scott, for your donation. David Huang says, as a historian, do you think it's going to take a major military conflict for America to get through this crisis?
A major military conflict? I'm not sure what's meant by that. A foreign war? No. And I don't think there's going to be a domestic insurrection either. If we're going to get through this, it's going to have to be through peaceful means.
John McKinney says, I honestly think Jon Stewart should run as a Democrat for president in 2028. He's likable and charismatic. He's the Dems' only hope at this point. This is what this user thinks.
You know what I think about electability. It's one of the words I would eliminate from the English language. We never know who's, electable and who's not. And, there are much more fundamental factors that decide elections than the characteristics of any individual.
Did you find the letter yet?
Keep going.
Oh, okay.
I'm good. I'll find it maybe.
Okay. Our next question is from For Meta What? They say, do you think Trump will prohibit the midterms from happening?
No, but I think there are, and I'm not going to outline them. I don't want to give them any ideas, but there are at least 4 or 5 things they can do without eliminating the midterms to virtually guarantee that they're going to win the midterms. That's the real danger.
Oops. Clicked the wrong screen. Trump has poached 3 House members already, Republican House members, taking their numbers from 220 to 217, which is 1 less than needed for a majority. You think they will keep the majority?
That's a good question. They will eventually, but right away, depending on how many more he poaches from the House, they may not. Plus, there are a lot of uncalled elections. So at this point, we don't know if it's going to be 4 votes, 5 votes, 6 votes, but something in that range.
Yeah, and a lot of these guys he's poached are from very red districts. It's going to be hard to.
All right. I found a reference to the letter. You ready?
Yes.
The letter states, quote, possessing copies of the voting system software enables bad actors to install it on electronic devices and to create their own working replicas of the voting systems, probe them, and develop exploits. Skilled adversaries can decompile the software to get a version of the source code, study it for vulnerabilities, and could even develop malware designed to be installed with minimal physical access to the voting equipment by unskilled accomplishments to manipulate the vote counts. Attacks could also be launched by compromising the vendors responsible for programming systems before the election takes place, enabling large-scale distribution of malware. The letter is signed by Professor Duncan Buell, Chair Emeritus of the NCR of the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, University of South Carolina, David Jefferson, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Susan Greenlow, Senior Advisor for Election Security, Free Speech for People, Chris Klaus, Chief Executive Officer, Fusion World, etc., Johnny Savage, Ann Wang, Professor Emeritus of Computer Science, Brown University. I mean, these are serious people. I have no idea what they're saying. I kind of get it.
Right. I
Uh,
mean, I get what they're saying, but they've just described ways in which someone could potentially cause havoc, but they haven't cited any evidence that they've seen evidence that that has happened.
Correct. But that's the point of the letter to investigate to see if there is any evidence of this. How can
Yeah.
you know whether there's evidence or not without investigating?
It sounds, but it just sounds very close to the same rhetoric the right wing was using in 2020.
No, it's totally different.
I
They
don't
were not
know.
saying, no, you're totally wrong on this,
Okay.
Sam. I rarely say you're totally wrong.
That's fair.
They were not saying we want an impartial investigation of voter fraud. They were saying outright, this election was stolen, it was fraudulent, we won in a landslide. And then they put out these most outlandish theories of how the election was stolen, none of which held up. Totally different from qualified persons, not me, asking for an investigation.
That is true. That's all true. I just have memories, distinct memories of them also talking about hacking voting machines and election software, and I don't know. I still haven't heard it. I mean, that didn't convince me of anything.
I agree. I agree. I'm not advocating this. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying some very serious people who have no, as far as I know, no particular political axe to grind are calling for an investigation. Why not? What's the harm of looking into something?
Yeah, I guess there isn't. I don't know.
And I can't
Um,
tell you whether what they've said has any scientific validity or not. I assume it does just from the credentials of the people, but I have no technical expertise.
right. I mean, I'm sure what they're saying could be done possibly. It's in the realm of possibility.
Yeah. And that's why, why not look? If you don't look, at very least, if you look, you'll say, hey, nothing there. Shut this up. End of story.
Thank you, Dave Stein, for your donation. I think we answered that question. Sammy Foot says, "Do you think Bernie Sanders type candidates could emerge for the Dems in future elections? Oddly enough, I've seen Trump supporters saying they actually like Bernie slash AOC."
Yeah, good luck with that. Bert, you think Trump supporters would vote for AOC or Bernie Sanders as a presidential candidate? Then you're living on another planet. That would never happen. And again, as I said, what's the one word I would strike from the English language, Sam?
Electability.
You have no idea who's electable. And the notion that, Bernie Sanders or AOC are more electable than someone else, it's pure speculation with nothing behind it.
Um,
Not that I don't like Bernie Sanders and AOC. That's nothing to do with it.
Danny Lazar says, "Hello, Professor. It seems like Trump's main goal during the next 4 years is to corrupt and dismantle the federal government. What do you think is the greatest risk stemming from a smaller, more corrupt federal government?"
Democracy. If you have a corrupt government intent on perpetuating the powers of those in control, the real danger is democracy. That's how democracy has been lost all over the world. We had the first golden age of democracy, not until the 20th century, after World War I, when we had about 24 democracies. That was cut in half in the 1940s. Then the second golden age was the late 20th century. And the 21st century has been one period of rapid decline in democracies all over the world. A very small percentage of the world's peoples today live in a fully functioning democracy. So sadly, what's so far seems to be happening, and I hope we can reverse it in the United States, is consistent with trends all over the world.
Adam Brandt Overby says, "Do you think the primary contest key was actually false because Dem voters never actually had a say in choosing Harris?"
After the fact explanations, you know what I think of them. Everyone's a genius when they know the answers. Uh, Based on the information I had at the time and the definition of the key, the Democrats, those who choose the nominee, did unite 99% behind Harris. But as you well know, before that happened, who was the one person who was most critical of what the Democrats were doing, Sam?
Allan Schlichtman.
That's correct. I blasted them, for openly. And you agreed with me. What a terrible idea to openly, viciously trash your elected president and your elected nominee. Well, who knows what effect that might have had in the key. It certainly tainted any Democratic nominee. I think based on the information I had at the time, I made the best call I could. But remember, the keys are based on history, and what happened internally within the Democratic Party has no precedent.
Diego asks, "What do you think about Gene Sharp's strategies to bring down authoritarian leaders, their books? Do you think we should buy his books and study them?"
I'm not sure I read this book, so I can't
Gene,
say.
you know who Gene Sharp is?
No.
No, neither do I.
There are, you know, there are a ton of good books. I'd recommend one by Guriev on spin doctors, one by Ben Giat on dictatorships, another book on why democracies fail. Those are really excellent books. I'm not familiar with this one, but there are, you know, 100 books now written on this topic.
Starch Flanagan says, "Is the letter about voting software saying that some people who were not supposed to have copies of the voting software were in possession of the voting software?"
I don't know if they said they know that they were in possession. Again, there's a very long letter. I didn't read the whole thing. I just read you an excerpt. Got to read it for yourself. And if you're more technically adept than I am, but I think they were saying it was pretty easy to do that. And that's why you need to look into it.
Do you think the bomb threats in Georgia actually deterred a lot of people from voting on election day?
I have no evidence of that, no.
Yeah, that's impossible to say. Um, Jeffrey Phillips says, "Do you think that if enough people know about your keys, it will have an observer effect where it could possibly change the outcome by enough people knowing about it and manipulating the keys?"
Keys are hard to manipulate. Polls are much easier to manipulate. We've seen polls being manipulated all the time. Keys are the big picture. It's hard to cause a recession. It's hard to cause a big foreign policy failure. It's hard to suddenly become charismatic out of nowhere. Plus, I'm not so arrogant as to even begin to claim the keys have that kind of influence.
What do you think about the theory that America needs to hit rock bottom, especially MAGA voters, like a drug addict before it gets better?
That's possible. There certainly is some truth to that. I don't endorse it entirely, but it's not strictly unreasonable. It's kind of the way addiction gets cured, right? You hit rock bottom, and only after you hit rock bottom can you rise up. It may be possible that the only way we're going to get cured is if MAGA under Trump drives us to rock bottom, and then we have to rise up above that. That's certainly a possibility.
Jeff Crusan says, "As any good historian will tell you, praise the nice, criticize the yikes. Neither exists in a vacuum. I'm not a fan of RFK Jr., but he has says that he wants to remove preservatives from our food that have already been banned in Europe. That could be a tiny good thing, but it won't outweigh the bad."
Yeah, it certainly won't outweigh the bad, and I have no confidence that the Trump administration is going to crack down in any way on big corporations. That would require a whole new set of regulations. And what has Trump promised us when it comes to regulations, Sam?
None of them.
None of them. Business is going to do whatever it wants. So I don't see that coming.
Um, TG Void says that the letter you quoted states that attacks are possible and not that it happened. There's just saying that election machines are potentially insecure.
That's exactly what I said, wasn't it, Sam? That they said this could happen. They had no proof that it did happen, and that's why they're calling for an investigation. Isn't that what I said?
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah.
think so.
So I'm totally in accord with our very smart audience member there. They proved nothing. They've simply said this could happen. Let's look into it. And I don't see the harm of looking into it. And if they find nothing there, that'll just give us more confidence in the election, and that's a good thing. If they do find something, that's important too.
All right, we have passed the hour mark. How many more questions do you want, Dad?
Five more.
Five more. Wow, that's amazing.
I'm
Here's the
feeling strong.
wow. Ah!
Even though this was a teaching, I taught for 2.5 hours before I rushed here to do the show.
That's pretty impressive. Here's the good news, though. If you haven't had enough past these five questions, there's a Lichtman Live post show, which is on my channel at Sammy Licht. The link to that live is in the description of this video. I'll also pin it to the chat in a second. All right. Jercules asks, do you think term limits on Supreme Court justices would increase focus on the political aspects of the court's elections and lead to partisan decisions like Ajit Pai overturning net neutrality in 2017?
Hard to imagine a more partisan court than the one we have now. I'm not a big fan, though, of term limits of any kind. I'm not advocating that.
Evan B says, Professor Lichtman, how can you justify Biden and Trump both having major policy changes when their sessions of Congress are historically unproductive?
That is entirely untrue when it comes to Biden. He has the biggest list of domestic policy accomplishments of any president since the 1960s. And it doesn't matter whether you like them or not. That's the key. The key is policy change. Uh, the tax and climate change bill, rejoining the Paris Accords, the CHIPS bill, the burn pits bill, the infrastructure bill, the stimulus bill, even a small gun control bill. And that's by no means the full list. All of them in contradiction to the policies of Donald Trump. So there's no question there were major policy change. So it doesn't have to be a new deal through that it'd be policy change from one administration to another.
There you go, folks.
But, you know, while the Democrats have all these accomplishments, how have I been most critical of them for when it comes to that?
Not messaging correctly about it.
Terrible, awful, abysmal messaging, along with utter cowardice, but that's a whole other story.
What would the effects be of destroying the Department of Education?
A very important resource for schools, colleges, and universities, aid to education across the board in the United States, and of course, eliminating any influence over what localities and states are going to do. And we've seen, a lot of red states banning books, including books by Nobel Prize winning authors, Pulitzer Prize winning authors, telling teachers what they can and can't teach. Abolishing the Department of Education will further push us down that road.
All right, I always ask you how many questions you want, and then I forget how many I've asked.
Two more. I think you asked three.
Okay, two more. CJ asks, do you have concerns regarding the change in tone big tech companies have had in this election versus 2020 and 2016? So I think, they got criticized a lot because they were moderating too much, and now they've kind of taken all the moderation out.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult problem. I have a whole bunch of answers in a book I wrote like 3 years ago called 13 Cracks Repairing American Democracy after Trump, in which I talk at great length of how to rein in some of this influence without, uh, restricting free speech. But it's a very, very difficult issue. And obviously, there won't be any regulations under Trump, except they may try to kill uh, critical voices. And I don't mean literally kill, I mean silence.
Right. Our final question of the night is from Mariana Achalong. They said, "What did it feel like the first time you got your keys right?"
I had mixed feelings, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I was delighted my keys were right, but I was no fan of Ronald Reagan,
Oh,
to tell
right.
you
You
the
picked
truth.
Reagan.
So it just shows my keys are totally nonpartisan. They're predictions, not endorsements. And even when my keys are right, that doesn't mean I'm happy about everything because I often predict winners with whom I do not stand politically.
Right. That's interesting. I had never thought about that before, but it makes sense now that you say it. Now that you've said it.
Thank you. Every
Oh,
once in a while, I make sense.
oh, you're welcome, Dad. Hey, Dad,
Yeah,
you're welcome.
thanks. All
Okay.
right, we're done.
With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live. The good news is Lichtman Live post show is coming up after this on my channel. The link to that is in the description of the video or pinned to the chat. Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight?
Stay tuned to Lichtman Live. We're just at the beginning of the new era. And there's going to be no other place where you're going to get it so straight with the kind of historical perspective and analytic twist that you're going to get on Lichtman Live. It's not going to be the blather that you typically hear on, the networks, the cable, the podcasts.
Very true, Dad. All right. Signing off from Lichtman Live. Say good night, Dad.
Good night. Hope to see you Tuesday.